Today I'm going to show you 10 genius scrap yarn projects to bust your stash. So no matter if you have tons of these tiny little leftover balls or you collect all the tails from weaving in ends, in this video I'm going to show you fun and easy knitting projects where you can put both to good use. Let's dive right into it. First of all, here is the golden leftover yarn rule. Use a little hair clip, a rust-free hair clip like this one here to secure the tail, and then use a little bit of scrap yarn or a stitch marker to attach the label. And if you are using yarn cakes, then store the label on the inside. That way you don't end up with one big box of yarn where all the tails get tangled and you don't know what it was. With that out of the way, here is my first scrap yarn idea. So my grandma always had a little pot holder on her needles, and 40 years later I can definitely understand why. So this here is a simple little pattern that is available on my blog, and it barely uses 30 grams of DK weight cotton yarn. And if you don't have that much left, well, this is the exact same pattern here, but using leftover yarn from all the tutorials I'm knitting for you. And I use these as pot holders. So for example, when I need to take something hot out of the oven or something like that, this is what I use. Or our fireplace has this little handle to open the door, and it gets rather hot after a while, so this is what my partner uses to open it. We also have a lot of glass tables in our apartment, so whenever I put a vase with flowers or so on one, then I put a little coaster in a matching color underneath the vase to protect the surface. And of course, if you enjoy cold drinks or so, a little coaster is always a smart idea. And if you attach little fringes to it, you can create a very easy mug rack, for your early morning coffee. Next idea. So personally speaking, I love knitting plushies. Some of you might already know my little mushroom patterns or my pumpkin patterns here. It even comes with a little vine. It's fall, and this is just a very great way to decorate your home. These can also be very lovely gifts. Both patterns are, by the way, available on my blog. And the best part is you only need very tiny amounts of yarn to finish one of these pumpkins. So you only need like 12 grams in this orange color and maybe 3 or 4 for the vine, and the vine is even optional. And I have different kinds of pumpkins available, and here, so for example, I also have this little warty pumpkin. You can use scraps to spice things up. But there are also toys. So for example, I am currently working on this humpback whale pattern. Hi. So test knitting for this pattern will begin very soon, and I hope to release it in around about late November. But again, I needed 25 grams of the blue yarn, around about 15 grams of the white yarn, and only 5 grams of the gray yarn to finish this big humpback whale plushie. And if you go to Ravelry, you will find tons of other little plushies, and most of them can be an excellent way to use up scrap yarn. And personally speaking, I feel these are such great gifts. So for example, whenever someone among my family or among my friends is pregnant, they will receive or typically receive such a little toy as a gift. Sometimes it's a teddy bear, sometimes it's a bunny, maybe a unicorn, whatever I feel fits well into their nursery. And a friend of mine is a marine biologist, so a humpback whale it will be. But of course, there are not only those leftovers from a jumper or a hat where you maybe bought 2 50-gram skeins, but you only needed 80 grams, leaving you with 20 grams of leftovers. Then knitting such a pumpkin can be a great and fun project. But what about all those small tails? You know, maybe you had a big intarsia project where you wove in tons of ends and you ended up with all those little tiny little tails. Please don't throw them away, collect them in a big jar, and then at the end of the year or so you end up with such a big ball, and you can actually use this to stuff your little toys. And if you have enough, you could even stuff a pillow or something like that. It's fluffy, it's warm, so why not use it? Another great way to use up all these tiny little pieces of yarn can be a magic knot ball. So the magic knot goes like this. You do an overhand knot with one tail and then another overhand knot around the other tail, and then you pull tight and trim the ends. And if you do this long enough, you can create funky little scrap yarn balls. This pieced together yarn can be used for many fun projects where you want a little bit of chaos or the color really doesn't matter. So you could use this to knit, I don't know, a floor mop or a dishcloth or something like that. Now, please bear in mind two things. Knots can come undone. So this works best with slightly fussy feltable fibers. And secondly, since knots can come undone, you shouldn't use this for any important project or a project that experiences wear and tear. So I don't know, the heels of a pair of socks is probably not a good idea. While, as I said, a dishcloth or so, or maybe a scarf or a little coaster, these could be perfect projects for this. Now you might be wondering, what on earth am I holding here in my hands? Please know that all these small scraps can be offered to birds. So I just used a little bit of bonsai wire and created this little cage here. So hold on a second. So I just stuffed all my scrap yarn here into this cage, and then I will just hang it from a branch in a tree or a little bush. And then in spring or summer, all the songbirds will come flying and use all the tiny little pieces of yarn to cushion their nests. And if you go to Amazon, you can find similar things. They're typically called bird feeders, and but you can use them to add your pieces of scrap yarn. Now a word or warning here. Before you do that, please inform yourself about the nesting habits of your local birds. Some species might prefer short pieces of yarn, while others rather prefer roving. So you can, ply things apart by hand, or use a carder, or maybe you even have a drum carder. That's even better. And by the way, on a side note, if you know how to spin, well, this could be another avenue to reuse scrap yarn. Just, turn it into roving. When it comes to birds, please stick to natural fibers. Plastic has no place in a bird's nest, so please do a little research beforehand. And by the way, if you think, well, I live in a big city, why would I even do this? Well, I do live here in the inner city of Vienna, Austria, and it is especially birds nesting in overly developed areas that struggle the most with finding appropriate nesting material, and not those living in, rural Wyoming. Christmas is, well, not exactly around the corner yet, but only a couple of months away. And if you go to Ravelry, you will find tons of fun little patterns for small ornaments and baubles, like this little snowflake. I starched it so it stays in place, and it's such a fun and creative way to decorate your tree with a very personal touch. And it's such a great way to use those tiny little pieces of scrap yarn. And if you go to my blog, you will also find a pattern for this gingerbread man. There's also a gingerbread woman. Also, very fun way to decorate your tree. And there are certainly also knitted Easter eggs or maple leaves, things like that. And most of these patterns only use a couple of meters of yarn, and so they are very, very great ways to use use up scrap yarns. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have some white leftover yarn, you could use it to create spider webs for your Halloween party. Or if you go to my blog, you will also find a little pattern for a knitted heart, perfect for beginners. But it's Valentine's Day, glue one of these to your Valentine's Day cards and you have a very unique Valentine's Day card. Or here, use maybe a darker card and glue one of these knitted snowflakes to your Christmas cards. Or maybe you are invited to an Easter brunch or so. Bring one of these knitted Easter eggs as a gift. Or I don't know, I've even heard some people knit these little hearts and give them away, to cancer patients in the hospital, things like that. So there are many fun little applications. It only uses so much yarn, it's so fast to knit, and the effect can be very great. If you have bigger balls of scrap yarn, then always consider Colorwork. So here, these are some Pride socks that I've knitted last year, and this is just a simple brick stitch, a simple mosaic pattern where you never, it looks very complicated, but you never have to hold two colors in your hand at the same time. So it can be perfect for, as they say, adventurous beginners. And what makes these mosaic patterns so attractive is that you only need very, very small quantities of yarn, because here one of these bricks is only 6 rows high. You could even go as low as 4, 2, or maybe 6, depending on how big your leftovers are. You do need a base color. This could be black, this could be white, this could be gray, something like that. But all the rest, that's just scraps. These here are some Vereil mittens I've only knitted a couple of weeks ago, and in fact there will be a pattern and a video tutorial here on my channel, because that's what you guys really requested. You all said you wanted a mitten tutorial, you wanted a pattern with Colorwork. So in 2 or 3 weeks or so, this is going to be published here on my channel, so definitely stay tuned. But I'm showing you these here, not only because I want to do some promo, but you only need 48 grams here in this light gray color, 30 grams in the dark gray, and 50 grams in this burnt orange color. And so this could be, if you have bigger, pieces of scrap yarn, this could be perfect. But I'm showing you these because if you take a look at these, at the color progression here, so this is, let's call them honeycombs. What is keeping you from filling all these honeycombs with a different color? So if you take a look at any Vereil pattern, there's typically a dominant background color, black, gray, white, something like that. But in between, there are basically stripes, and you can use up all your scrap yarn for those. Or here, these are some intarsia socks I knitted 3 years ago. Again, the pattern is available on my blog. And of course, you need this background color, but here for the cuff, for these cherry blossoms, for the fillings of these cherry blossoms, for the branches, all this could be scrap yarn. So intarsia projects, mosaic and Vereil is typically always perfect to use up scrap yarns, and it can be smaller projects like a cowl or like a hat or something like that, or socks. All these are perfect. And since we're talking about socks, Scrappy socks also deserve an honorary mention, because not all scraps are the perfect match for your mosaic or intarsia project, but you can still turn them into socks, and I really urge you to look into helix knitting. So the idea is this: instead of finishing a round, you stop 3 stitches before, and then you pick up a different color, and then you finish that round, but once again you stop 3 stitches before the color change. and this will create these jogless stripes. I have a full tutorial on helix knitting here on my channel. I link it to you up in here. And it's such a fun technique because once again, you only end up with one jog at the beginning of each, well, let's call them stripes, but in between there will be no jog, so you can really blend different colors into each other, because if you do normal one by one stripes in the round, you end up with this horrible stripe here. It's not looking very pleasant. Here, this is much nicer, and I really have to credit my good friend Evelyn here. She knits these Scrappy helix socks with a passion, and she almost turned it into an art form, and I bow to her creativity, and it's just so smart that I really had to mention it here. And the good news is you can apply the helix knitting technique to basically every sock pattern. So this is just my plain vanilla sock pattern. You can find it over on my blog, or there's a tutorial here on YouTube as well. And if you are worried that you might run out of yarn, well, then knit the socks toe up, or use the helix knitting technique and apply it to a simple beanie. A simple hat works as well. And let's be honest here. So personally, I love wearing hand knitted socks around the house in winter. And if they are slightly, well, let's not call them ugly, let's call them funky. It doesn't matter. And even if you go, I don't know, hiking or so, realistically speaking, your socks are covered by your shoes and your trousers, and no one is actually going to see them. I mean, that's the problem of all sock knitters. No one typically sees their socks. So if they're slightly funky, it doesn't matter. And you know, I actually don't this is just leftovers, and I actually think it looks rather pretty. And also, if the alternative is throwing all these leftovers away, well, I know how I would decide. Here is another fun idea: tassels. So this shawl here, again, the pattern is available on my blog, would look a lot more basic without these tassels in a contrasting color. These tassels, they are super easy to make, and they can elevate a plain scarf, triangular scarf in garter stitch, or a shawl. Super easy to make, perfect to use up scrap yarn. Also, personally speaking, I feel that a lot of knitted hats look a lot better with a pom-pom. And if you have ever tried making your own pom-poms, you probably know how much yarn they eat up. So I still remember here for this hat, this pom-pom used up a full 50 grams gain of this super expensive camel hair yarn. I wanted it to match, but that was, I don't know, maybe 19 or 20 euros down the drain. So why not use a scrap yarn to create pom-poms? Now mind you, this won't work for every project, but imagine you have a simple gray or white hat, and then you add a colorful spot here at the top. This can be great. Or you have a nice shawl or a scarf that converges towards a triangle or a little tip, and then in white or gray, and then you add, or black, and then you add this colorful pom-pom at the scrap yarn pom-pom at the end. Can be awesome. Or always think of fringes. A lot of shawls look, I mean, this is just the mug rug I showed you earlier before, but a lot of shawls, simple shawls, look a lot better with fringes, and why not just use scrap yarn? And here is my last fun scrap yarn idea. Well, at least what I consider to be fun. A lot of people hate knitting swatches. I love them, and it's possibly the thing I actually knit the most. Not actual projects, but swatches. Mostly because I need to prepare all these swatches whenever I show you a new technique, especially for my second YouTube channel, which is of course all about short slow motion videos focusing on one technique without any blah blah. That's where I knit all these swatches. But please think about it. If a pattern requires a new technique you have never knitted before, what exactly is keeping you from casting on, just a couple of stitches with a bit of scrap yarn to give it a try. And no matter if it's cast-ons, increases, bind-offs, decreases, when you knit an important project like a sweater or I don't know, a wedding gift or something like that, you often want to make sure they look perfect. And then and there, I will always cast on a couple of small little swatches. So here, these are all little swatches I've knitted recently. And, just to be sure, here, we're just talking about 10 to 12 stitches and maybe 10 rows to check out an edge stitch or a cast on or something like that. And it takes maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, and then I will have my answer. So I often get the question, Norman, what is the best bind-off for X? The best bind-off for ribbing, garter stitch, my sweater, my socks, my hat, or the best bind-off for my brioche pattern? And it's very, very important to realize that this all boils down to your preferences. There are very, very, very few true, rights or wrongs in knitting. And a little swatch, a little bit of scrap yarn will not only teach you so much about knitting, instead of just blindly following what I say, your decision will also be in line with your preferences rather than mine, because my preferences, they don't matter. For example, I often get the question about matching cast-on and bind-offs. I show you how to do a German twisted cast-on, and ultimately always the question comes, well, what would be a bind-off that looks the same? Now, setting aside that you can easily start every project with a provisional cast-on and then bind off using the same technique on both sides, I personally don't care about that. I don't need my 95% of all cases, I don't need my projects to have matching bind-offs. But maybe that's something you care about. So these are all questions only you can answer yourself, and a swatch and a little bit of scrap yarn will always be your biggest ally. Anyway, that's it. Please, if you have a favorite way to use up scrap yarn that I haven't mentioned, or maybe I mentioned it but you want to expand on it, add some details, maybe add a specific pattern, then please comment below and share it with the world. And as always, happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.